Welcome, night wanderers, to another tale from the shadows. You've found yourself at the doorstep of bedtime myths and mysteries, where whispers become warnings and legends are never quite as distant as we'd like to believe. Tonight, we journey deep into the heart of Ravenswood, where the trees lean close and the silence hides something far older and far hungrier than we can imagine. Keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open as we bring you The Slender Man, a tale of unseen terror, the whispering woods. In the fading light of a late summer evening, the small town of Ravenswood settled beneath a heavy, unnatural quiet, the kind of silence that presses in close, making the rustling leaves seem loud enough to shatter the stillness. The air carried a chill too cold for August, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Michael Hargrove, a journalist with a stubborn skepticism, stood at the edge of the woods, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting a narrow path through the gathering dusk. He'd come chasing rumors, whispers of children vanishing, of shadows that stretched too long, too thin, and eyes that never blinked. To him, it was a story, a tale to be unraveled and exposed. But tonight, beneath the skeletal branches and curling mists, Michael would learn just how close myth and reality could blur. He stepped forward, the dirt crunching underfoot, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves thick in his nostrils. Every crack of a twig set his nerves on edge, his breath catching as though the trees themselves watched his every move. A sudden movement in the corner of his eye made him whirl, but the forest held only empty shadows. Yet in the distance, something shifted. Tall, silent, something that did not belong. His heart hammered, a wild rhythm that threatened to drown out reason. He forced himself forward, deeper beneath the thick canopy, where moonlight barely touched the mossy ground. The whispering trees seemed to lean closer, their branches brushing his jacket like the fingers of unseen watchers. Memories of the missing children haunted his mind, their faces, pale and wide-eyed in old photographs, haunted the town's collective memory. Each disappearance was swift, no trace left behind, no clue to the fate that befell them. Then, without warning, the beam of his flashlight caught something impossibly tall and thin, gliding between the trunks, a figure so slender it seemed more shadow than flesh, its limbs unnaturally long and sinuous. Its face was blank, featureless, as if the very essence of humanity had been erased. Michael's breath froze in his throat. The Slender Man. But was it real? Or had the forest claimed his mind first? Michael's hand trembled as he gripped the flashlight tighter, the cold sweat slick against his palm. The forest around him felt impossibly vast and suffocating all at once, a labyrinth of twisted branches and tangled roots that seemed to shift subtly with every glance. The air tasted metallic, thick, with an ancient, silent warning. His footsteps slowed, crunching hesitantly on dry leaves that whispered beneath his boots. Somewhere, a bird called out, sharp and desperate. Then silence fell again, like a suffocating shroud. The trees were watching, breathing, waiting. He told himself it was nothing, just the mind playing tricks in the dark. But the stories, God, the stories, clung to him like a second skin. Children gone without a trace, their last moments etched only in terrified whispers of those left behind. His breath caught as the beam landed on a crooked tree marked with strange, angular scratches, symbols etched deep into the bark, raw and fresh. Michael knelt, tracing the carvings with a shaking finger, runes or perhaps warnings. His skin prickled as a sudden gust stirred the leaves, though the air had been still moments before. Behind him, a subtle shift in the darkness. He froze. A coldness wrapped around his spine like a serpent. The hair on his arms rose as a long, slender limb slid silently between the trees, too smooth, too unnatural. The slender man, its faceless head tilted slightly, as if studying him. No eyes, no mouth, but the sense of being seen, judged, hunted. Michael's mind screamed for him to run, but his legs were rooted to the spot. The forest seemed to close in, a living cage of shadows and silent threats. Then a whisper, soft, almost lost beneath the rustling leaves. "Come closer." His heart thundered in his chest, terror prickling his skin. The line between myth and nightmare blurred, and he knew there was no turning back. Michael forced himself to move, though every instinct screamed to flee. The forest thickened around him, a tangled maze of gnarled roots and skeletal branches clawing at the darkening sky. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied, casting long, warped shadows that danced like specters across the moss-covered ground. The silence was suffocating. No rustle of small creatures, no distant owl's call, just the oppressive stillness that felt unnatural, as if the forest held its breath in anticipation. He pressed forward, heart pounding like a war drum in his ears, the cold night air turning to icy pins and needles on his skin. Every step deeper felt like a descent into another world, one where light and hope were swallowed by a void that stretched beyond sight. Memories of the missing children clawed at his mind, faces frozen in time, eyes wide with terror, vanished without a trace. The townsfolk whispered of the Slender Man, a faceless hunter who haunted these woods, a shadow that stretched beyond human comprehension. They said he could reach inside your mind, pull your fears to the surface, and snatch you away in silence. Ahead, the beam of his flashlight caught a sudden movement, a flicker between the trees, impossibly tall and impossibly thin. The creature's elongated limbs moved with unnatural grace, its faceless head turning slowly, as if observing a predator measuring its prey. Michael's breath hitched, cold sweat slicking his brow. His pulse hammered so loud he was sure it would give away his presence. But the Slender Man did not need sound. It hunted in silence, stalking the edges of sanity. Frozen, Michael watched as the figure began to glide forward, its tendril-like arms weaving through the branches, blurring the line between corporeal and shadow. The deeper it came into the light, the more the forest seemed to darken around him, as if the creature absorbed the very essence of night. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the air, a sound that twisted the air itself, pulling at something deep within Michael's mind. He staggered back, trying to resist the growing dread that clawed at his thoughts. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted, roots writhing like serpents, branches creaking with sinister intent. The forest was alive, alive with the malevolent presence of something ancient and hungry. He knew then that he was not just an observer in this nightmare. He was the prey. The moon, veiled behind a thick curtain of clouds, offered no comfort as Michael stumbled deeper into the wilderness. His breaths came shallow and quick, each one a fragile attempt to steady his racing heart. Around him the trees whispered secrets older than time itself, their leaves brushing together like soft, sinister lullabies. Shadows coiled and twisted with every flicker of his faltering flashlight, shapes that morphed into fleeting nightmares just beyond the edge of sight. He tried to recall how the disappearances began, the sudden vanishings of children who once played freely beneath these very boughs. No footprints left behind, no cries in the night, just an echoing void where innocence once thrived. Rumors spread like wildfire, tales of a tall, slender figure watching silently from the darkness. But Michael was a man of reason, a seeker of truth, and he refused to succumb to superstition. Yet here he was, feeling the very air turn thick and heavy, as if the forest itself was warning him away. A creeping chill traveled up his spine as a cold breath brushed the back of his neck, invisible but unmistakable. He spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, catching only empty branches swaying in the breeze. Still, the feeling lingered, a presence that could not be seen, but could not be ignored. Then, through the trees, he saw it again, the impossible silhouette, the slender man, standing impossibly tall, faceless and silent, limbs unnaturally long and curling in ways no human could achieve. The figure didn't move, but its very existence warped the air, bending reality with its cold, inhuman aura. Michael's mind screamed at him to run, but his feet betrayed him, rooted by a terror that clawed at his soul. He felt his vision narrow, sounds around him fading into a hollow silence, as if the forest sucked the world's life away, leaving only the creature and himself locked in a deadly gaze. The slender man's faceless head tilted slowly, an unspoken invitation or a warning. Michael could not tell which. In that moment, time itself seemed to shatter, and the woods dissolved into a swirling nightmare of shadows and whispered fears. He was no longer a visitor. He was hunted. The world around Michael dissolved into a strange, suffocating void, where sound and light warped unpredictably. His senses betrayed him. What was real and what the forest conjured blurred into a maddening haze. His pulse hammered like a relentless drum, echoing in his ears louder than the distant call of the night creatures. Every step he took felt heavier, as though invisible hands weighed down his limbs. The trees loomed closer, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes that clawed at the sky and seemed to reach for him. The moon broke through the clouds for a moment, casting silver light on the slender figure standing motionless between the trunks. The slender man. No face, no eyes, only the terrifying suggestion of a shape, stretching impossibly tall, limbs swaying in a silent rhythm like the tide. Its presence pulled at something deep within Michael's mind, unraveling memories and hopes like brittle threads in a storm. Suddenly, a voice echoed, soft, a whisper on the wind, but it carried a weight that crushed Michael's soul. Come closer. Frozen, he felt a cold rush surge through his veins, paralyzing, yet drawing him forward as if hypnotized. His heart battled between dread and compulsion. His body moving through his mind screamed to stop. The forest closed in around him, swallowing the light. Shadows thickened into shapes, figures lurking just beyond sight, their eyes glinting with a hunger that transcended time. The air grew colder, heavier, and Michael knew the stories were not just tales. They were warnings, and he had stepped beyond the threshold. The deeper Michael ventured, the more the woods seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a slow, deliberate heartbeat that echoed in his chest. The night air thickened, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something else, something metallic and cold, like the kiss of a forgotten grave. Branches, gnarled and skeletal, clawed at the sky and scratched the thin slivers of moonlight as they struggled to pierce the dense canopy above. Each step was a battle against the underbrush that snagged at his boots, as though the forest itself sought to trap him. His flashlight flickered, casting jittery beams that revealed fleeting glimpses of shapes, twisted forms that seemed to lurk just beyond the reach of the light. Michael's breath hitched as the temperature dropped sharply. The cold was unnatural, seeping into his bones and whispering of ancient, forgotten terrors. Then, in the stillness, he heard it, the softest rustle of movement, not from the trees or wind, but something living, watching. He froze, every nerve screaming in alarm. A sudden flash of white against the black shadows, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, emerged between two ancient oaks, the Slender Man, its faceless head tilted, just slightly, an unspoken invitation or a silent command. Michael's mind screamed to run, but his body betrayed him, frozen in place, caught in the predator's gaze. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the creature reached out with long, tendril-like arms that moved with unnatural grace. Michael's vision blurred, darkness creeping in from the edges as the whispers began, soft voices swirling around him, chanting his name in a language older than the earth. He struggled to scream, but the sound died in his throat. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the endless void where the Slender Man's face should have been. When Michael awoke, it was not to sunlight or the warmth of day, but to a darkness that clung to his skin like a second shadow. His body was sprawled on cold earth, damp leaves pressed against his cheek. Every breath was a struggle, heavy with the weight of something unseen pressing down on his chest. He pushed himself up, trembling, and the forest greeted him with silence deeper than before, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow even the sound of his own heartbeat. Around him, the trees leaned closer, their branches forming twisted arches like the hands of the dead reaching for him. His flashlight lay broken nearby, shattered glass scattering shards that caught the faint glimmer of the moon. Panic surged, but it was tempered by a creeping numbness that dulled his senses, like he was drifting beneath a suffocating tide. And then he heard it, a soft rustling, the faintest movement in the shadows. Eyes. He was no longer alone. A tall figure emerged, impossibly thin, its limbs bending in unnatural ways. The Slender Man. It stepped forward without a sound, tendrils extending and retreating like the breath of some ancient beast. The faceless head tilted slightly, as if considering Michael's worth, or perhaps savoring his fear. Michael's mind screamed for escape, but his legs refused to obey. The world around him warped, trees melting into twisted shapes, the ground shifting beneath his feet. Time fractured, moments stretching and snapping like fragile glass. He was trapped, caught in a nightmare that folded reality back on itself, a place where the Slender Man's silent gaze held dominion. As the creature reached for him, a whisper echoed through the forest, a voice cold and hollow. "You belong to the night now." And with that, the darkness swallowed him whole. Michael's senses returned in fractured pieces, sharp shards of cold and silence. He found himself somewhere else, yet still trapped within the forest's grasp. The trees around him twisted impossibly, their branches gnarled into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach toward him with accusatory fingers. His skin prickled as the oppressive weight of the Slender Man's presence pressed against his mind like a fog, erasing memories and replacing them with fragmented visions of shadows and loss. Faces flickered, those of the vanished children, their eyes pleading and hollow, as if caught in an eternal scream. He struggled to stand, to fight back the creeping madness clawing at his thoughts, but with every breath the whispering voices grew louder, weaving spells of despair and hopelessness. The Slender Man's tendrils brushed against his skin, cold as the grave, leaving trails of frost that sapped his strength. He was no longer just hunted, he was being claimed. In that endless night, Michael realized the terrible truth. Some stories are not meant to be told, and some shadows are never meant to be chased. The forest seemed to breathe with a life of its own, every rustle and crack magnified in Michael's mind, as if the woods whispered secrets meant only for him, warnings etched in the silence, urging him to flee or succumb. He stumbled forward, each step heavier, the ground beneath his feet seeming to shift and pulse like the heartbeat of the nightmare itself. Shapes moved just beyond his vision, shadows curling and stretching like tendrils that reached to snatch at his sanity. The Slender Man was never far, a faceless wraith stalking the periphery of his senses, pulling at threads of fear and doubt. Michael's thoughts twisted, memories warping into illusions that gnawed at the edges of reality. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the forest's hungry silence. Every moment stretched into an eternity, a slow unraveling of the mind beneath the gaze of the endless night. And then, without warning, a sudden piercing light shattered the darkness, headlights slicing through the trees, voices calling his name. Rescue or deeper descent into the shadow's web. The headlights cast long, trembling beams that splintered through the trees like shards of fragile glass. Voices pierced the heavy silence, familiar and frantic, pulling Michael back from the precipice of oblivion. Yet even as relief surged within him, the forest seemed to resist, as if unwilling to relinquish its prey. Figures emerged, friends from the town, faces etched with worry and fear. They reached out, voices rising in desperate calls, but Michael's gaze remained fixed on the shifting shadows just beyond the light's reach. The Slender Man lingered there, a towering silhouette melting into darkness, faceless and eternal. Its tendrils twitched, recoiling momentarily from the light, but never truly gone. As Michael was pulled from the grasp of the forest, a cold whisper grazed his ear, a promise or a curse. You cannot escape the night. The rescue was only the beginning. Days passed, but Michael found no refuge in the waking world. The Slender Man's shadow clung to him like a second skin, haunting his every thought and dream. Sleep became a battleground, where faceless horrors lurked just beyond the veil of consciousness, their silent watch unrelenting. He sought answers in old newspapers and forgotten archives, piecing together a tapestry of disappearances and whispered legends that stretch back decades. The Slender Man was no mere ghost story. He was a dark force, feeding on fear and silence, a predator older than the forest itself. Friends and family noticed the change. Hollow eyes, haunted glances, the tremor in his voice when shadows lengthened at dusk. Michael knew his time was running out. The creature's tendrils were closing in. One night, driven by desperation, he returned to the edge of the woods, determined to confront the nightmare that stalked his soul. But the forest had changed. The familiar paths were twisted and broken, as if the land itself resisted his presence. A whisper floated on the wind, cold, ancient, and terrible. "Come home." The forest loomed before him, a living maw of twisted trees and shadowed secrets. The night wrapped around Michael like a suffocating shroud, the whispering wind carrying the mournful cries of the lost. Every step into the wilderness was a step deeper into a nightmare woven from silence and fear. His breath formed ghostly clouds in the frigid air as he pressed onward, senses heightened to every snap of twig and rustle of leaves. The shadows seemed to dance just beyond the reach of his trembling flashlight, alive with unseen horrors. The Slender Man's presence was palpable now, a weight that bent the air and twisted reality. The faceless figure emerged from the darkness with limbs like living shadows, reaching silently toward Michael's faltering heart. The woods whispered ancient promises and curses, urging surrender to the endless night. Michael's resolve wavered, the line between hunter and prey dissolving into the chilling unknown. With every heartbeat, the forest swallowed more of his soul, drawing him into a realm where nightmares were reality and escape was but a fleeting illusion. The weight of the darkness pressed down, an oppressive force that sapped Michael's strength with every step. The trees closed in, their twisted limbs reaching out like claws to trap him in an eternal embrace. The forest floor beneath his feet seemed to pulse, alive with the whispered voices of those who had vanished before him. His flashlight flickered again, a dying candle struggling against the all-consuming black. Through the wavering light, the Slender Man appeared, towering, silent, faceless, his tendrils weaving through the branches like threads of nightmare. Michael's mind spiraled into chaos. Memories bled into hallucinations. The boundary between reality and madness blurred until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. The voices in the dark sang a siren song, luring him toward the heart of the forest, toward a fate written long before he arrived. He stumbled, caught between fear and fascination, as the Slender Man's silent gaze bore into his soul. The last vestiges of his will shattered, leaving only a hollow shell, ready to be claimed. And as the shadows closed around him, the forest whispered once more, "Welcome home." Michael's mind became a tempest of fractured thoughts and half-remembered fears, swirling in an endless storm of shadow and silence. The forest no longer existed as a place, but as a living nightmare that stretched beyond time and space. He wandered through twisted corridors of trees that bent impossibly, the ground shifting beneath him like a shifting dream. The Slender Man was everywhere, lurking in every corner of his vision, a constant, faceless presence stalking his every step. Its tendrils brushed against the edges of his consciousness, pulling memories and sanity alike into the void. The whispers that filled the air grew louder, voices not just in his ears, but inside his very mind, weaving threads of despair and hopelessness. He remembered the missing children, their terrified eyes and silent screams echoing in his thoughts. He knew he was joining a long line of victims, drawn into this shadow realm, swallowed by a force that fed on fear and isolation. Desperation drove him deeper into the darkness, searching for a way out that seemed to vanish the closer he came. Every path led back to the same haunting figure, tall, slender, and faceless, waiting patiently for the final moment to claim him. As the last flicker of light died within Michael, the Slender Man reached out, and the nightmare became his reality forever. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a fragile thread tethering him to a fading reality. The trees around him whispered in a language older than time, their voices curling like smoke into the endless night. Every step forward felt like sinking deeper into a mire of despair, the forest's grip tightening like a vice. He stumbled into a clearing, bathed in ghostly moonlight that seemed to drain the color from the world. At the center stood the Slender Man, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, faceless and silent, a silhouette carved from shadow itself. Its tendrils writhed slowly, a hypnotic dance that seemed to pull at Michael's very soul. Frozen, Michael watched as the creature's limbs stretched toward him, weaving an unspoken promise of oblivion. His mind fractured, memories splintered and scattered like shards of broken glass. Faces flickered in the darkness, those of the missing children, their eyes hollow and accusing. A sudden wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a chilling whisper. "You are mine now." The world spiraled into darkness. The darkness clung to Michael like a suffocating shroud as he awoke, not in his bed, but sprawled on cold, damp earth beneath the twisted boughs of the forest. His body ached, limbs heavy and numb, mind clouded with the residue of a terrifying dream that felt too real to dismiss. Around him, the woods were alive with silence, a silence that screamed. The trees, once mere sentinels of nature, now loomed like grotesque guardians of a secret too dreadful to bear. The moon cast pale light through the canopy, revealing nothing but shadows that seemed to shift and breathe. A cold breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a voice that chilled him to the bone. "Welcome to your new home." Michael's eyes darted around, searching for the source, but found only the infinite blackness between the trees. Somewhere, deep within the darkness, the Slender Man waited, patient, eternal, and hungry. He knew then that escape was a lie. The forest had claimed him, and the nightmare was far from over. The night thickened around Michael, each breath a visible thread of frost dissolving into the cold air. His limbs felt heavy, shackled by unseen chains woven from fear itself. The forest whispered secrets that clawed at his mind, weaving a tapestry of shadows and forgotten cries. With trembling steps, he rose, the earth cold and unyielding beneath his feet. Each movement echoed like a heartbeat in the vast emptiness, a fragile connection to a world that now seemed distant and unreal. From the corner of his eye, tendrils of shadow flickered, elongated, twisting shapes that slithered between the trees like living smoke. The Slender Man was never far, a faceless sentinel in the gloom, watching with empty eyes that saw beyond sight. Michael's mind reeled as visions surged, faces of the lost children, their silent screams etched into his memory, their absence a void he could not fill. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of despair that wrapped around his soul, pulling him deeper into the endless night. He knew now that some horrors are not escaped, they are embraced, a fate sealed in silence. The forest shifted, as if alive, breathing with ancient malice. Michael stumbled onward, his thoughts fragmented and raw. The very air felt thick with despair, a suffocating veil that dulled his senses and blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Around him, shadows moved with eerie grace, tendrils slipping through the trees like liquid darkness. The Slender Man's presence was a constant weight, pressing into his mind with cold inevitability. Memories of the missing children flooded his thoughts, innocent faces twisted by fear, voices lost in silence. Each step forward was a descent deeper into the void, a journey with no return. Suddenly, a flicker of light pierced the gloom, a distant glow, faint but unwavering, a spark of hope in the unending night. Michael's heart surged with desperate yearning. Could salvation be near, or was it another cruel mirage conjured by the forest's dark heart? Michael quickened his pace toward the distant light, each step driven by a fragile ember of hope amid the overwhelming despair. The glow wavered like a candle in the wind, casting long, flickering shadows that danced grotesquely on the gnarled tree trunks. But as he drew closer, the light twisted and warped, revealing itself as nothing more than the flicker of a lantern held by a figure swathed in darkness. The silhouette moved with unnatural fluidity, limbs stretching and bending in impossible ways. The Slender Man, a nightmare made flesh and shadow. Michael's breath caught as the faceless figure turned toward him, tendrils writhing silently like hungry serpents. The forest seemed to pulse with the creature's presence, the ground beneath his feet shifting in sync with the slow, terrifying rhythm of the predator's advance. The whispers returned, growing louder, filling the air with an eerie chant that clawed at Michael's sanity. The voices of the lost children echoed through the trees, their silent screams twisting into a terrible chorus. His legs trembled, the urge to flee battling against the paralyzing fear that rooted him in place. The boundary between hunter and hunted vanished, swallowed by the endless night. As Michael stood frozen, the Slender Man's tendrils crept closer, their movements fluid, yet impossibly alien. The faceless entity exuded a silent hunger, a void that threatened to consume not just flesh, but soul itself. Every instinct screamed to run, but the forest seemed to bind his feet with invisible chains. The whispers swirled around him, voices both sweet and sinister, weaving a spell of despair. They spoke of the vanished, children lost to the night, their spirits forever trapped in the Slender Man's grasp. Michael's mind reeled as fragmented memories flashed, faces distorted by terror, empty eyes pleading for release. He tried to shout, to scream for help, but no sound escaped his lips. The darkness pressed inward, the trees bending as if to close the final exit. The Slender Man's presence grew overwhelming, a suffocating force that erased hope and replaced it with eternal dread. In that crushing silence, Michael understood. Some nightmares are eternal. Some stories have no end. As the tendrils reached out, cold and relentless, Michael felt the last light within him flicker and dim. The forest swallowed his cries, the world narrowing until nothing remained but the faceless void. Time, fractured and faded, dissolving into an endless night where the Slender Man reigned supreme. In this shadow realm, Michael became another whisper in the woods, a lost soul bound forever in the eternal silence. The forest exhaled a breath of darkness, hiding its secrets beneath a veil of mist and memory. Outside Ravenswood, the town carried on, unaware of the fate that had befallen the man who dared to chase legends. But somewhere deep within the whispering woods, the Slender Man waits still, patient, watching, hungry, and the night has only just begun. You've been listening to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries, where the night always has something to say, if you're willing to listen. If this story sent a chill down your spine, remember, the forest isn't the only place where shadows linger. They're here in your mind, long after the tale ends. Thank you for joining us in the darkness. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast so the stories can keep finding their way to you. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.